The buyer paid 3 times market value for land that had nothing on it but a boarded-up ranger station and a name nobody spoke aloud anymore. The job came through a property management firm I'd worked with twice before. Routine stuff, clearing abandoned structures, cataloging what was left, filing the demo permits. The contact was a woman named Aldous Vrain. Not a company. A person. She had retained the firm directly, paid the deposit before the contract was countersigned, and listed the parcel by its legal description rather than any name. I didn't think much of it at first. Buyers overpay for remote acreage all the time. People fleeing cities, people romanticizing solitude, people who've looked at too many photographs of fog and convinced themselves they want to live inside one. When I pulled the parcel records that first evening, though, the number stopped me. 3 times assessed value, for 46 acres of ridge and a decommissioned ranger station that had been sitting vacant for 11 years. I ran the title history the next morning. The parcel had changed hands twice in the last century. Once in 1961, when a timber company acquired it from a private family named Ord, and once 11 years ago when the county condemned the ranger station and the timber company quietly surrendered the acreage rather than pay remediation costs. The Ord name appeared on a single deed. Before that, the record went to handwritten county ledgers from the 1890s, and the handwriting on those pages listed the parcel under a different designation entirely. Not a family name, not a survey number. A word I didn't recognize. I photographed it with my phone and didn't think about it again until later. That was a mistake I'd make a few more times before this was over. Encountering something I didn't understand and deciding to think about it later. I drove out to the parcel on a Tuesday, the week before any equipment was scheduled. It's standard. I like to walk a site before machinery arrives, get a sense of what's actually there versus what the survey says. The road to the ridge was unpaved for the last 4 miles, the kind of gravel track that narrows until you're not sure it's a road anymore, and then opens suddenly into a pull-off. I parked and sat for a moment. The silence up there was particular, not the ordinary quiet of woods. Woods have ambient noise, movement in layers, birds indexing territory. This was the silence of a place where the birds had decided not to be. I got out anyway. I told myself it was the altitude. The ranger station was a single-story building, maybe 1,200 square feet, wrapped in the kind of vertical board and batten siding that weathers silver in high altitude. Every window had been boarded from the inside. I could see the nail heads on the exterior, driven from within. That detail registered as strange, and then settled into the category of things that might have a reasonable explanation if you thought about it long enough. The door was padlocked with a relatively new lock, which meant someone had been here more recently than 11 years ago. The lock was good hardware, not a contractor's box lock, not a county orange tag, the kind of lock you buy when you want something to stay closed. I photographed it. I photographed everything that first visit, a habit I've had since a job years ago where what I saw on site and what appeared in the official records afterward were not the same. I called Aldous Vrain that evening. I had a list of standard questions: access permissions, asbestos disclosure from the previous environmental survey, her preferences on what to salvage versus demo. She answered each one quickly, without hesitation, in the tone of someone who had anticipated the questions before I asked them. When I got to the padlock, she paused. Not long, maybe 3 seconds. Then she said she would arrange access for the following week and that I should not attempt to enter before then. I asked if she'd been to the property herself. She said she had reviewed it thoroughly. She did not say yes. Those two things are not the same, and I noticed the difference, and I wrote it down, and I told myself it probably didn't matter. The access arrived by courier the next morning, a physical key envelope, no return address, postmarked from a city 3 states away. Inside, 1 key, a handwritten list of what was in each room of the station, and a single typed instruction at the bottom of the page. The instruction read, "Remove everything in order, beginning with the room on the northeast corner." It was not phrased as a suggestion. It was not explained. The room list was specific enough to be unnerving, not storage room or office, but precise contents, down to the number of file boxes in each space. That level of detail meant she knew what was inside. It meant someone had inventoried those rooms, which meant someone had been inside recently, which meant the boarded windows and the good padlock were not neglect, but maintenance. Someone had been keeping that place closed. I went back to the Ridge on Friday with 2 workers I'd used on previous jobs. Reliable people, not easily rattled. I didn't show them the room list. I unlocked the padlock and pushed the door open, and we stood in the threshold for a moment while our eyes adjusted. The interior smelled of mineral cold and old paper, not rot, not mold, not the organic decay you expect from a building that's been sealed for a decade. It smelled preserved. The front room held a desk, 2 filing cabinets, and a topographic map pinned to the wall with the parcel outlined in red marker. The outline was precise. Someone had stood in this room and traced the boundaries of land they already owned, or land they wanted, or land they were watching. The chairs faced the map, not the desk. This room had been used as a monitoring station. The filing cabinets were locked. The key from the envelope opened both of them. Inside the first, folders organized by year, running from 1987 to 4 years ago. Each folder held photocopies of county records, soil surveys, aerial photographs of the parcel taken in different seasons, and handwritten notes in a small, consistent script. The notes were observational: dates, times, descriptions of changes to the tree line, notations about water drainage on the eastern slope. Whoever had written them had been visiting this land at regular intervals for over 30 years. They had watched it the way you watch something you are waiting to acquire. The second cabinet held only 1 folder, labeled with the same word I'd seen in the 1890s ledger, the one I'd photographed and not looked up. I looked it up that night. It was not a survey term. The word was old. Not archaic old, not a dead language that linguists catalog, old in the way that certain things are old in this territory, the kind of old that has no clean origin because it predates the frameworks people use to track origins. I found 3 references to it across the rest of that evening, one in a digitized folklore archive from a university press, one in a self-published regional history of the county from 1974, and one in a transcript of a recorded interview with a woman from the Ord family, conducted in 1962, the year after the timber company bought the land. In the interview, the Ord woman was asked about the name her family had used for the parcel. She said she couldn't explain it exactly, but that the land had a prior claim on it that the deed didn't capture. The interviewer asked what she meant. The recording ended there. I called the property management firm Saturday morning and asked for the full client profile on Aldous Vrain. They sent me what they had: a business registration from a holding company, a legal address in a city I knew only from maps, and a professional background listed as land acquisition and remediation consulting. That last phrase sat with me. Remediation consulting. The term usually means environmental cleanup, contaminated soil, old mine tailings, that kind of work. But it can also mean something looser: the management of properties with complicated histories, the kind of histories that require a specialist rather than a realtor. I had worked in land clearing for 9 years. I had never met a remediation consultant who paid 3 times market for acreage before inspecting it in person. That is not how remediation works. That is how acquisition works when you already know what you're acquiring. We cleared the northeast room first, as instructed. It took the better part of Monday, not because of volume, but because of the number of things requiring careful handling. Beneath the floor, under a section of plywood that had been cut and reseated so precisely that I only found it because I was looking for structural irregularities, there was a cavity, not a crawlspace, a deliberate void, framed in, sealed with a different grade of lumber than the rest of the subfloor. Inside, a metal box, the kind used for fireproof document storage, combination locked. And beneath the box, wrapped in oilcloth that had kept them in near-perfect condition, a series of photographs. Not digital prints, developed prints, the older kind, with the color register slightly off the way photographs from the 1970s and 80s have. Each photograph showed the same parcel, the ridge, the tree line, the station, taken from the same vantage point, at what appeared to be the same time of year. But in each photograph, the tree line was different. In some, it was healthy. In some, sections of it were dead or absent. In the earliest photograph I could date by the photo stock, there were structures on the ridge that no longer existed. I photographed everything before we moved any of it. Then I called Aldous Vrain. She did not answer. I left a message describing what we had found, the cavity, the box, the photographs, and asking how she wanted to proceed. She called back within 4 minutes. She told me to box the photographs in the order I found them, seal the box, and set it aside. She told me the metal document box would require her combination and that she would come to the site to handle it personally. Then she said something that stopped me. She said she was glad the photographs were intact and that she had been concerned about moisture. She had been concerned about moisture. In a sealed cavity we had just discovered by accident. She had been worried about something she had told me she did not know was there. She arrived on Wednesday in a vehicle that was too clean for the gravel road and wearing clothes that were too considered for a demolition site. Aldous Vrain was perhaps 50, precise in the way of someone who has spent decades making precision into a habit. She walked directly to the northeast room without asking where it was. She opened the metal box with a combination she had memorized. 4 turns, smooth, practiced, the way you open something you've opened many times before. She looked at the contents for a long moment without removing anything. Then she closed it, latched it, and told me the crew could continue with the remaining rooms. She was at the site for 11 minutes. She had driven 4 hours. She had done all of it to open a box she already knew the combination to and verify that its contents were undisturbed. That night I searched Aldous Vrain's holding company. It took longer than it should have. The registration was clean, the paper trail deliberately shallow, the kind of corporate structure you build when you want to be findable enough to conduct business but difficult enough to stop anyone from tracing the chain. I found 2 prior transactions. The first, a parcel in a different state, acquired 6 years ago for significantly above market, with a history of previous private ownership going back to the early 20th century. The second, a land purchase 8 years before that one, in a third state similar profile, remote, above market, a long, quiet history before the sale. I pulled the county records for both. Both parcels had been cleared, both had prior owners whose names appeared in local historical records in ways that suggested something other than ordinary land use. Aldous Vrain had done this before, twice that I could find, possibly more. I went back through the photographs from the cavity. Laid in order, oldest to most recent, they were not simply a visual record of the land. They were a documentation of something occurring on the land at irregular intervals. In several photographs, the dead sections of tree line appeared in patterns that weren't consistent with disease or drought. The geometry was too regular, the edges too defined. In 2 photographs, there were markings on the station building itself, symbols I didn't recognize, painted or chalked, that had been absent in the photographs before them and absent in the photographs after. Temporary, applied and then removed. The photographs were not a property record, they were a monitoring log. Someone had been documenting events on this land across decades, and the events had a periodicity to them, a rhythm of occurrence that the photographs, laid end to end, made visible. I called the County Historical Society the next morning and asked about the Ord family, not what was in the public record, but whether anyone there had done primary research on them. The archivist I reached knew the name. She said the family had been one of the original settlement families on that ridge, and that they had left, not sold and moved, not died out, but left, in a way that the historical record described only as departure, with no forwarding context and no documented reason. She said the family's few remaining descendants, when contacted for the 1962 Oral History Project, had been willing to discuss everything about the Ord history except the land itself. Every interview that touched on the specific parcel had either ended early or contained a gap in the recording. She said the archivist who had conducted the 1962 project had made a note in the project file about the gaps. The note read, They stop when I ask about the name. The metal box Aldous Vrain had opened and taken. I hadn't seen what was inside, but I had been in the room when she opened it, and I had seen her face. There are faces people make when they see something they feared would be gone and find it still there. Relief and something older than relief. A kind of vindication that implies a long wait. That was what I had seen on her face when she looked into the box. Whatever was inside, she had been waiting to reclaim it. That reframed everything about the transaction. She hadn't bought the land for what it was or what could be built on it. She had bought it to retrieve something that was on it, or in it, or had been left there by someone who understood what the land held. The above-market price was not generosity. It was expedience. She had paid what she needed to pay to get access before anyone else could. I pulled the records on the 2 prior parcels Vrain had acquired and looked for what she might have retrieved from them. The first parcel had a structure on it at time of purchase. A building that the county demo records showed was cleared 18 months after acquisition. Contents removed by owner prior to demolition. The second parcel had no structures, but the site preparation records listed the recovery of non-structural buried materials, owner claimed. Both times she had gone in, taken something, and the land had been cleared. Both times the clearing had happened after the retrieval, not before. I was not the purpose of the transaction. The crew, the demo permits, the careful room-by-room instruction. All of it was scaffolding. A legal and logistical frame for what she had actually come to do, which was retrieve the contents of a locked box from a sealed cavity beneath the floor of a building that no one else had been allowed inside for 11 years. There were 3 more of her prior transactions I found the following day. I had been looking in the wrong document types. Not county real estate records, but federal land use registrations, the kind filed when you purchase parcels that abut wilderness designation or have resource extraction history. 3 more parcels, 3 more above-market acquisitions, 3 more clearings with materials owner claimed. 5 total, spanning 22 years. She had been doing this across half the country, moving from one site to the next with a patience and consistency that implied not opportunism, but a plan. A long plan. The kind you make when you know exactly what you're looking for and you've identified where it's been placed. Placed, not left, not abandoned. Placed. That word arrived in my thinking around midnight, and I couldn't move it. Someone had distributed something across 5 separate parcels in 5 separate states, decades apart, and Aldous Vrain was systematically collecting it. I thought about calling the firm and pulling off the job. I thought about it seriously for about an hour. The case for leaving was obvious. I had found evidence that my client had systematically misrepresented the nature of her acquisitions, that she had prior knowledge of the site that she hadn't disclosed, and that whatever she was collecting across these parcels existed in a legal and definitional gray space that I had no framework for. The case for staying was more uncomfortable. I already knew too much to simply walk away. Pulling off the job wouldn't unfind the photographs, wouldn't unread the records, wouldn't unsee the look on her face when she opened the box. Leaving would just mean being alone with what I knew, without any additional context for what it meant. And something in me, the part that had been in this work for 9 years, the part that had learned to read sites, wanted to see what came next. The remaining rooms of the station cleared over the next 3 days. Each one was exactly as Vrain's list had described. The file boxes were where she said they'd be, the quantities matched, the contents were what she'd indicated. Except the last room. The southeast corner room, the last on her instruction order, which I had noticed was the opposite end of the building from the northeast room where the cavity had been. Her list described it as empty. It was not empty. It held a single wooden chair facing the east wall, and on the east wall, at seated eye level, there was a section of plaster that had been treated differently than the surrounding wall. Not painted over. Treated. Something had been applied to it that had preserved the surface while the rest of the room's plaster had cracked and settled. Whatever had been written or drawn on that section of wall, someone had wanted it to last. I called Vrain and described the southeast room. There was a silence on her end that lasted longer than 3 seconds. Then she asked me to describe the wall treatment in detail. The color, the texture, whether the material appeared to be a sealant or a substrate. I described it as carefully as I could. Another silence. Then she said, "Don't touch it. Don't photograph it." She said she would come back. I said I had already photographed it. She said, in a tone that was not quite alarm but was adjacent to it, "What did you use?" I said my phone. She said, "Go outside. Go outside now and stay outside, and don't go back into that room." I asked her why. She said the wall had not been treated to preserve what was on it. It had been treated to contain it. And then she hung up. I stood in that gravel pull-off until the light went. I did not go back inside. I thought about what she had said, treated to contain it, and I tried to locate a rational interpretation of that phrase that fit everything else I knew. I could not find one that was fully satisfying. The rational explanations had limits. They all had limits. What I kept returning to was the old word from the 1890s ledger, and the Ord woman in 1962 saying the land had a prior claim on it that the deed didn't capture, and the archivist's note that people stopped talking when asked about the name. Whatever the Ord family had known about this land, they had not been the first to know it. And whatever had been placed on that wall in the southeast room had been placed there by someone who understood the difference between preserving something and containing it, and had chosen containment. Vrain arrived the following morning with a second person, a man I was not introduced to, older, who carried a case that appeared to hold monitoring equipment. They went directly to the southeast room. I was told to wait outside. I waited for 40 minutes. When they came out, the man with the case went immediately to the vehicle. Vrain stopped at the threshold. She looked at me with the expression of someone who has been deciding how much to tell you and has settled on a number. She said, "The transaction is complete." She said the remaining demo work could proceed as scoped, southeast room included, and that the wall would be handled by her team. She said I had done good work. Then she said something I have turned over many times since. She said, "You'll want to stay out of the county records for this parcel going forward, not because you did anything wrong, because what's recorded there is going to change, and you don't want to be confused by the difference." The demo permit for the station cleared 2 weeks later. The crew completed the work in 4 days. I checked the county records for the parcel a month after that, the way she had told me not to. I knew I would, even as she said it. The records were different. Not falsified in any obvious way, adjusted. The prior transaction history had been trimmed. The Ord name still appeared, but the oldest ledger entries, the ones with the unrecognized word, were no longer in the digitized archive. The 1962 Oral History Project still existed, but the transcript referencing the Ord parcel had been reclassified as restricted. The photographs from the cavity were not listed in the site materials anywhere. The parcel had been cleaned the way a well-managed situation is cleaned, not erased, just made ordinary, made into a piece of land that had been purchased, cleared, and released into the record without residue. I don't know what was in the metal box. I don't know what was on the wall in the southeast room, or what containing it actually meant in practice, or whether whatever it had been is now somewhere else. Filed in a different location by a woman who has spent 22 years systematically gathering things from land that was never supposed to be sold. What I know is the shape of the operation. Someone or something distributed material across remote parcels over decades, and Aldous Vrain is collecting it, parcel by parcel, with patience and resources and a legal infrastructure clean enough to withstand ordinary scrutiny. What I know is that the land itself had a prior claim on it before any deed. The Ord family knew it. The word in the 1890s ledger named it. And whoever placed the photographs in the cavity and the treatment on the southeast wall understood they were working with something that required management rather than ownership. And what I know is that Vrain understood it too. She had always understood it. That was never the question. The question I couldn't answer was who had taught her. Who taught Aldous Vrain what to look for? And how many parcels is she still looking for?